So things are shaking up here in Canada. They just elected Pierre as the new leader of the Conservative Party in Canada here. They just hold a party election. They nominated him as the head frontrunner leader. He's very kind of populist. He's very kind of, inspired by the Freedom Convoy, inspired by the, pandemic and not being more authoritarian, more on liberty and stuff like that. Well, here's the article here from CTV News saying that Pierre Poilievre wins Conservative leadership on the first ballot. There's a lot to be said about him. There's a lot of good things and bad things. Again, I'm not going to put blind faith in any politician unless I know all the facts about that person. I don't think people should have blind faith to any politician whatsoever because, whether being Justin Trudeau or Pierre Poilievre or whoever the next PM is going to be, you're still going to have to deal with corruption. You're still going to have to deal with the swamp within Parliament and the swamp within, the leadership and governments and the corporate estate tying themselves with governments, regardless of who the face of the leadership is. So that's the big deal of this, and that's why I put more emphasis on, say, the Freedom Convoy, because it was more of a grassroots inaction to the situation rather than just blindly trusting governments, blindly trusting elected officials, because elected officials, they're going to meet with lobbyists, and who knows if they're going to side with you or they're going to side with the lobbyists. That's the tricky part. So this has obviously made a lot of attention, and our current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, had to speak up about this, and True North pointed this out, saying, asked if he decided to run again in the next election because of Poilievre's popularity, Prime Minister Trudeau says there is a rise of various populism based on anger and misinformation and disinformation. So they believe that the reason why there's all this hype with Pierre Poilievre and getting Trudeau out and all this stuff is because people are misinformed. And, well, take it from the horse's mouth himself and listen to what he says about this.
Influence your decision to stay on and fight?
I think we're seeing a rise of various forms of populism based on anger and misinformation and disinformation all around the world in many democracies. I've had many conversations with my fellow leaders at the G7 and in other contexts around the pressures that democracies are facing.
Yes, my other globalist elite leader friends are very concerned because people are gathering together and uniting together based on common goods, and they're actually fighting against our authoritative ways. It's very concerning. They're not getting into line. They're not staying in true with the spirit of the establishment. Because of misinformation, because of disinformation. Oh my God. This is crazy.
External pressures, like the pressures put on us by countries like Russia or China or others.
How about the pressure of high inflation? Cost of living. People can't afford homes. People can't afford rent. There's shortages. People can't afford to heat their homes. How about all of that? How about the fact that you're demonizing farmers? How about the fact you're demonizing truckers? How about the fact you're demonizing blue-collar workers that help provide for the nation of Canada and are part of Canadia's wealth? How about that? How about that being the rise of populism? That people are fed up being exploited by the globalist regimes. They're being sick and tired of people like Trudeau and people like Joe Biden and other neoliberal figures that pretend to pat you on the back but then also screw you over.
Many of them internal, with people who are frustrated, scared about where the world's going, worried about their place within it. And politicians face a very simple choice. Do you allay those fears and empower people and show them how we're going to build a better future? Or do you amplify those fears for short-term political gain?
or what you do is silence them out of society, exile them away from ordinary Canadian public life. Because that's what they did with the truckers. That's what they did with people that stood outside the lines of the Trudeau administration. Anyone that questioned the lockdowns, the pandemic, the mandates, the vaccines, they were pretty much shunned out of society, shunned out of ordinary life. They were thrown under the bus. They were, basically dehumanized. That's what they did. They took away their bank accounts. They took away their livelihoods, their assets, everything. If they didn't comply with big pharmaceuticals, if they didn't comply with the pharma fascist regime.
It's the kind of conversations we had in the 2015 election. And it looks like it might be the kinds of conversations we're going to have again, with the Conservatives choosing a path of amplification of anger and misinformation, instead of actually figuring out how to respond to the real threat of climate change, how to respond to the real threat of making sure...
How to respond to the real threat of climate change, which is why you took a private jet to Costa Rica, causing more pollution, which is why you bought a pipeline after you said you're committed to fighting climate change and decreasing the oil production. Yeah, you're very committed to saving the planet, even though you've done the exact opposite and enforcing even more pollutants, enforcing even more disaster for the environment.
Everyone is included in the economic growth we're creating. That's the discussion that not just politicians, but all Canadians are going to be engaged in over the coming years. And I, for one, am very excited about being able to lead those conversations with this great team behind me.
So he thinks it's because of misinformation. Oh, you're just angry because you don't understand. You don't understand the situation that the Liberal government and how Canadians need to step together and step in line to the establishment, because we're doing everything that we can. But here's the note. Here's something that Justin Trudeau should maybe understand a bit more, why the rise of populism. So I looked this up because I've seen a lot of these polls in America about the trust in media, and I know trust in media in America is very low, and I understand that completely. I mean, have you seen it? But I wanted to ask, what's the trust in our media? Because it may be a tiny bit better. We may have a bit of more journalism ethics. It's not as corrupted as American media, but it's still corrupted. It's still fairly corrupted. So this is from Yahoo, saying Canadians' trust in the news media hits a new low in recent years. So the trust in our media has even gone downhill. And it says, according to the Reuters Institute 2022 Digital News Report, trust in the Canadian news media has sunk to its lowest point in 7 years. The study produced by the Reuters Institute for Study of Journalism at the University of Oxford has found that trust in the news has dropped 13% since 2016. Only 42% of Canadian respondents trust most news most of the time, a slight drop from last year's 45%. Like previous years, the study found that Francophones are the most trusting of the news and news sources than Anglophones, so that's French people versus English people. Although both groups are less trusting of the news than ever before. The study also showed that the age is a major factor in how much respondents trust the news, with higher trust among residents aged 35 or older than younger adults. This finding is consistent with past research. Young people tend to consume less news in general and are more reliant on social media and other digital platforms for information. And then it also goes into media independence, stuff like that. But it's interesting. It's interesting. And a lot of that has to do with the fact of the pandemic, has to do a lot with the lockdown situation, how we were told numerous things, how we're not told the vital information about the virus, and why people like me had to resort to telling you the information about, the virus and vaccines and what doctors, researchers are finding and new studies and clinical analysis. And again, the reason I provide all that information is not to propagandize people, because I'm not bought by any corporation or anything like that. I'm not here to be pro-vaccine or anti-vax. I'm here to provide all the information so that you can do with your will and your best judgment and move forward based on your decision. That's what all this is about. And of course, a lot of younger people, they're going to go on YouTube and Facebook. They're going to see a lot more independent news. They're going to see a lot more podcasters, because we're not suits and ties. We're not talking heads. We're not part of this, big agenda with a $60,000 studio. I'm doing this on a shoestring budget. So that's something to note, and that's one factor in the rise of populism. Not misinformation, not disinformation. Well, misinformation from the mainstream media. They're the ones projecting misinformation, but not because we're the ones that are just interpreting wrong information. Here's also this. Toronto Star pointed this out, saying Canadians less trusting of governments, politicians as pandemic drags on. And that's from the February 9th, 2022. So just a few months ago, that the rise of populism has grown because of the fact that we've been lied to about COVID. We've been lied to about the situation. We've been lied to and not been informed correctly on this virus. And people are stepping up and demanding answers. And there's a lot of misreports. There's not a lot of reporting on, the boiled water advisory that's happening in different native villages across Canada that's been going on for years. They're not reporting on, homelessness. They're not reporting on this. It's the same as the American style news. And we've becoming more American. We're becoming more reactionary than doing actual good journalism. And that's not even me saying that. That's former CBC employees. Because we showed on this channel before, I think her name was Tara something. And she was a former CBC employee, one of the top anchors, and she had to leave the network because she knew that the management of the network decided to go more reactionary and clickbait rather than doing actual journalism. And that fuels the fire. That's what's highlighting a lot of this populism, is the lack of trust in government, the lack of trust in the media, the fact that there's such a disconnect between the two of them, the fact that we've been so polarized for all these years, the fact that they keep us divided so that the establishment elite can conquer. Like, these are all factors, and why people like Donald Trump risen to power, because he was able to play that card so well. He was able to trick people that he was a populist, which he wasn't. So there's that to point out. And then there's also this too. I mean, this is kind of the big factor here, but the short National Post put together a short history of Justin Trudeau's scandal, all the scandals that he's been part of with the Liberal government, and I don't need to go through all this, but you know the situation. You know about the costumes in India, the blackface, groping allegations, SNC Lavalin, the weed charity scandal, the illegal casino. So, scandals on top of scandals. We know how corrupted the parliament system really is. The parliamentary system really is. And that's why people like Pierre is making headway on this. And he's risen to popularity. Now, like I said, regardless, I know people like to think that Pierre Poilievre is a savior from, this corruption within the Liberal government, but we don't know how corrupted this individual is. We don't know how corrupted the Conservative Party is. And like I said, it doesn't really matter who the face of the Prime Minister is. They're still going to be tied with all this corruption. They're still going to be tied with, the World Economic Forum. They're still going to be tied to global institutions that want to rein in Canadian politics. The same with America. The same with any other country. Because there's such a global capitalistic takeover of democracy. It's been taken over by global elitists that want to dominate over democracy, dominate over politics, and dominate over the culture of all these different nations. And that's what's happening right now. So it may be good that Pierre Poilievre is going to be an opposition to Justin Trudeau and bring a different perspective. At the same time, though, don't put your eggs into all that baskets. Don't put all your eggs into one basket, because whether it's him, whether it's the NDP, whether it's even the Green Party, you're still facing corruption. You're still facing hurdle after hurdle after hurdle of corruption. And like I said, I had more faith and trust in grassroots movements like the trucker protests than just trying to figure out who the best leader is. Because eventually they're going to turn.